Today. Today we're going to have Kevin Gaskey, who's a principal at Kimley-Horn Associates. He'll be giving an overview of the Wade Park project in Frisco. Mr. Gaskey's got 31 years experience in the profession, with 24 of those years at Kimley-Horn, where he's now principal. He received his bachelor's at Ohio State in 1985 and his MBA at the University of Dallas in 1992. He's licensed in 23 states and does land development on both a local and national basis. He's married with 6 kids and 5 grandchildren and counting. So I'll now hand it over to Kevin to give the presentation today.
Thank you, Julie. One of the first questions I usually get asked when people find out I have 6 kids is, all with the same wife? Yeah, all with the same wife. Ages almost 30 to 14. A set of twins in there too, so we got a twofer. My wife got a twofer in one of the pregnancies. Here to talk to you about Wade Park. If a lot of you have driven up past up in Frisco, you've probably seen the site just south of Lebanon Road on the east side and been wondering what's going on there, why there are 2 big holes in the ground. Folks from the city of Frisco that are here, they're probably wondering why the 2 holes in the ground are still there. Hopefully we'll be able to explain a little bit of that today. It is moving forward. Some of the locations that are shown on this map were put together by the architect, WBA. See, some of them are correct, some of them aren't correct. So where they have Toyota listed was about a year ago where Toyota was looking. They're no longer looking there, obviously. But this site is bound by Lebanon to the north, Parkwood to the east, Dallas North Tollway to the west, and a portion of John Hickman runs through the site about 2/3 of the way to the south. The overall site's 175 acres. It was once owned by the Wade family. That's why it's named Wade Park. The developer is a group out of Atlanta called Thomas Land Development. If you look them up on their website, you can see some of the different projects they've done nationally. We've worked with them specifically on this site. We've worked with them in Sarasota, and we've also worked with them on a project out in Sacramento, the Sacramento Rail Yards. Contractor on the site is Balfour Beatty. It's their Atlanta office that we're actually working with because they have a strong relationship with Thomas Land Development. And the architect is WBA, also out of Atlanta. Would like to give a quick shout out to some of the folks at the city of Frisco. It's been a very off and on process with our client. A lot of it's had to do with the different tenants and different leases they're trying to get signed. But we did want to give a shout out to Joel Fitz, Toyin, if Toyin's here, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name. Alyssa Sanders and Fire, Anthony Saturino, and Art Hartle. All 5 of them, plus many others at the city, have been very patient as we've gone through the process with our client. So there's basically the overall site, 175 acres. The Star, which is another one of our projects, is just to the southwest of the site. The gate, which is due east of our site on the north side of John Hickman. That portion of John Hickman has been built. The other portion to the east from the tollway over to Parkwood has been preliminary design but has not been constructed yet. So here's the overall site. I don't know if there's a pointer here, but if you can see the far upper left-hand corner, the pink shaded building, that's a Whole Foods. That pad's been there for about a year. People are wondering why Whole Foods hasn't started. Well, originally Whole Foods wanted to be open this spring, and they decided to pull it back and open next year instead. So Thomas was doing a lot of work to get them open, and then they decided they didn't want to be there as quickly, which is typical in the development leasing world. Everything in orange is multifamily with retail underneath it. Approximately 2,800 units of multifamily in orange, and over there in yellow on the southeast corner, right where it says multi-phase development. John Hickman is about 2/3 of the way through the site. Pretty much everything to the north of future John Hickman has been planned. There's still some site planning changes occurring on the southern half, but the orange buildings, which are multifamily, the red building, which is Whole Foods on the far left. Those are pretty far along in the development process and in design. This is what we're calling Phase 1A, which includes the Whole Foods and a couple of out parcels. This is what is called Phase 2A. If you've gone by the site, you'll see a big hole in the ground. And that big hole that's rectangular that runs parallel to the tollway is a 4-story underground parking deck. And what they had done originally was basically dug the hole because they thought they were going to go ahead and start with the soil nail walls, which we're going to get to here in a minute. And it typically happens with a project like this. They had to pull back and decide what they were going to do on some of the other leases. To the next phase is what we're calling Phase 2B, which is multifamily. Next phase is what we're calling 2C. And then the remainder is what we're calling Phase 3 right now. The orange, the bottom of the orange basically goes to future John Hickman Parkway. The area to the south was one of the 2 competing sites for J.P. Morgan Chase. And it came really down to the wire between this site and the site in Legacy West. And obviously the site in Legacy West won out. That was bad news short term for Thomas, but good news is they're running out of land in Legacy West. So eventually somebody's going to come and want this site for a corporate office. A few things to point out on this slide. I'm going to back up the colors a little bit. I mentioned the Whole Foods up at the top left-hand corner. Directly down from that, there's another pink building. That's called an IPIC. They're out of Boca Raton, Florida. If any of you are familiar with IPIC. Directly across from IPIC, there's another pinkish building. That area is called the Boulevard. That other pinkish building on the east side is going to be a Pinstripes bowling alley. These have all been announced. Going further down to the left, just below, there's one little pink building all out there by itself next to the purple building. I'm sure some of the younger crowd in here is familiar with the Rustic. That's going to be a Rustic. And then just next to it, the purple building is going to be Hotel Zaza. So those have all been announced. They've got a lot of other tenants that they're looking to bring into the site. Like I said, this portion to the south that's just been highlighted in gray was the track that was going to be the J.P. Morgan Chase track, but they went to Legacy West. What you see when you go by the site now under construction is basically this portion of the site. Like I said, the underground parking garage is where the IPIC theater is, and then Whole Foods is basically under the word construction. Really think that one thing that was really interesting about the site, and you wouldn't think this until you got into the overall grading of the site, was Whole Foods wanted to be right there on the site. They wanted to be on the corner of Lebanon and the tollway. They wouldn't take any other location on the site. That's where they wanted to be. So if you can see, their loading dock is basically right up against the frontage road. So when we started setting the finished floor for Whole Foods, it was really dependent on what the elevation of the frontage road was and how we were going to come up and get into their loading dock. Long story short, that Whole Foods building, one building, almost drove the entire grading plan for that site, for all 110 acres north of John Hickman. If we lowered that building, it lowered the parking garage, more dirt. If we raised that building, the truck dock wouldn't work properly and Whole Foods wouldn't accept it. We wanted to push Whole Foods further to the east, but our client would not allow that because Whole Foods wanted that location. So it was really interesting as we were going through the overall design of the site, how that one 55,000 square foot building drove a multi-million square foot project. This is one of the temporary detention ponds we have on site. You've probably seen another big hole out there on the southern side of the site. This is just north of John Hickman, future John Hickman right-of-way. And where this pond would be, if I go back a few slides, would basically be right where that big gray parking structure is in the orange, just a little bit to the west of that. At the time when we did that temporary pond, Stan Thomas said, well, he wants to maximize the amount of GLA and square footage retail he can get on the site overall. He said we're going to put it underground. Well, to date, we really don't know where underground is, but it's going somewhere someday. We think it's eventually going to get pushed south of John Hickman because there's more room over there, and that would be a more logical place for the detention for the overall site. One of the interesting things we had, one of the interesting challenges that we had on this site was the parking garage itself. And if you remember back a few slides, we have office buildings on one side and the iPic movie theater on the other side with a very small corridor in there. Well, in that corridor, we had to put water, sewer, underground drainage, telecommunications, electrical duct bank, transformers. We get the design for the soil nail wall, and all of a sudden see that these soil nails extend out to about 20 feet, including portions under the fire lane. So we ended up working with the city and city staff and had to move a few of the utilities around, but we're able to design it such that none of the utilities would conflict with any of the soil nails, and if there were utilities that a soil nail would go under, the city was okay with it as long as the nail went under the public utility and not over it. The city didn't want to have to be in a position where they have their crews out there digging through a soil nail and not knowing how to put it back in place. So anywhere where we have utilities, we are above the soil nails such that the city crews, maintenance crews, won't have to come back out and address a soil nail in the future. Hayward Baker is the designer and installer of the soil nails, and I believe they're going to start, Holly, this Friday? Yeah, this Friday they're going to start installing the soil nails. One of the things I found really interesting about this is they start at the top, work their way around, and go down. So these are on about a 10 by 10 grid. And if you remember some of the construction on 635 had a tremendous amount of soil nails on it as well. So this is basically going to form the outer wall of the parking garage, and then there'll be an inner wall that they'll actually build the structure within. They've milled a lot of rock out of there. If you've gone by the site, there's a mountain of rock on the southeast corner of the site. Again, we couldn't even come close to getting the site to balance because of the Whole Foods and where the Whole Foods sat. We tried to lift the site. We couldn't waste enough dirt. I think we were going to have to lift it 2 feet. We just couldn't waste enough material. Plus, when we first started designing the project, the parking deck was two stories deep. Then it went 3 stories deep. Then it went 4 stories deep. And just last week, when Holly and I were in another meeting, a parking deck that wasn't there is now 1 floor underneath. And they talked about under the office and hotel putting two story decks underneath there. So this is a project that continually evolves and changes. Joel and others at the city of Frisco can tell you. And we just react to a lot of revisions on the project. Just to give you a feel for some of the architecture, the building on the right, the hotel and office, that's what's going to be facing the tollway. 2 office towers. They're planning on building the first office tower, the one to the left, first. That office tower would be directly behind that Whole Foods that we were talking about. And just from a rough elevation standpoint, you come off of the tollway at elevation 724, you go into the first level of underground parking underneath the iPic Theater, and the parking underneath the iPic Theater is the parking that serves both office towers in this hotel. Well, then last week at a luncheon, they decided, well, let's talk about putting 2 stories of parking all underneath the hotel and the 2 office buildings. And that was a fun conversation because all the public utilities are already in on the 2 roads that go between the office tower, the hotel, and the 2 office towers. That's the first time I think the city's hearing that today. Joel's shaking his head. We don't know where the parking deck's going right now. We're hoping they keep it where we had it planned, but I think what they're also looking at is actually taking the height of the towers up. If any of you stay involved or read the Dallas Business Journal, the amount of office space that is in downtown proper, there's a lot of vacancy in downtown proper, but out here, it's just they have people calling them for more space, more space. So these towers may actually go up in height, which if they do, we'll be back at the city of Frisco with an updated TIA and updated sewage calcs and whatnot. We're just not sure where they're heading right now. A lot of it depends on what tenants they bring as the lease negotiations go on. This is the Central Boulevard, a picture of it. Basically, iPics on one end of the Central Boulevard, and at the other end is pinstripes. Have worked with the city of Frisco very closely on the fire lanes and the restaurants and how they will work. Obviously, Whole Foods up at the hard corner at Lebanon and the tollway. A couple other things we had to coordinate with the city was they were also doing improvements to Lebanon at the time, had design underway, so we had to coordinate that, along with improvements to the frontage roads of the toll road. So these were all getting baked in as we were doing platting, as Thomas was trying to buy portions of the site. They bought the last portion of the site, the 60 acres south of John Hickman Parkway, back in the fall. So it was a very fast-paced project. Every time we see a change, we save the previous revisions and files, and we open up a whole new set of plans because things are always changing and going back and forth. This is the rendering for Hotel Zaza, which would be at the end of one of the streets, public ways I should say, for the overall site. And one thing I wanted to show, and I don't think it showed up in, let me go back a slide. Obviously the hotel, the hotel entrance, they're going to have these unique boxes. They call them jewel boxes, and they're kind of hard to see. Let's see if I can point one out on this slide. You can see a couple of, but if you remember where the iPic theater is, it's the pink building all by itself on the far left. Then there's Forum Way, which runs north and south, just on the west, of the east side of Whole Foods. There's 4 small little shops in the median, if you will, of Forum Way, and they're called jewel boxes. And they look like a jewel box because all 4 sides are glass. If you've been to the Caesar's Palace recently, the shops at Caesar, there's a few of them in the shops at Caesar where they took out the animated robots and fountains and they put 2 jewel boxes in there. It's kind of a new thing in retail that you can walk by and see inside the entire store. And obviously this project and Legacy West and Jerry Jones project are all competing for a lot of the same smaller tenants. The restaurateurs, obviously there's an Apple store already close by, but they're all competing for the same users. That picture, one of these pictures showed a jewel box. I think it's on that. That just, there would have been a jewel box just back from the words Hotel Zaza. We have a video we want to show you. That was put together by the architect. But we have to find it first. Here we go. That's not it. You know where it is? There it is.
That should be it.
Thank you. So that's looking northeast. That would be the Whole Foods there on the left. This is where you'll see some of the jewel box buildings in the center. We told the architect he did have enough Suburbans and trucks in the parking spaces. And that's the multifamily. The multifamily is actually going to have amenities on the roof, pool, common space. We did not do that. That was the architect. Let's see here. Next slide was questions, so I can just go straight to questions. Yes, sir.